Howdy, folks, and welcome to the Hunting Stories Podcast. I'm your host, Michael, and as usual, we got a good one for you today. Today we connect with Josh Sunberg. Josh had some crazy stories. He was a lot of fun to talk to. He accidentally, I think, tagged me in something, and then I basically hounded him until he came on and shared some of his stories with us. That being said, he shared some with me offline, too, and I can tell you right now, we're going to get Josh back on this podcast to tell some of his other stories, but it's a unique episodes from vagina trackers to all sorts of other crazy things. So I hope you guys enjoy. I don't want to steal any more of his thunder. So let's go ahead and kick this thing off and let Josh tell you some of his stories. All right, Josh. Welcome to the Hunting Stories Podcast, brother. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great.
Good, man.
Hi.
Good. We were goofing around before the actual recording here, but we kind of ran into each other on social media. You tagged me on accident on something basically, and I wouldn't leave you alone. So I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're willing to tell some hunting stories, man.
Yeah. Yeah, I've always wanted to be on a podcast like this just for the fun of it, just to share some stories or insight or whatever, whatever anybody's interested in to hear from
Yeah,
me. So I love talking hunting, man. I live it all the time. That's what I do for my job. That's what I do for, that's what it's my passion. It's my career.
yeah.
So it's what I do.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. And I
Yeah.
told you already, and this is for the listeners, but you found a good first podcast because this one's nothing but fun. Because you get to tell your favorite stories. You don't gotta
Yeah.
tell us how to string a bow or whatever it is. You just get to have some fun with it. So, but let's take a quick step back and why don't we introduce you to the folks, Josh? Why don't we tell them
Yeah.
who they're hearing some stories from today?
All right, awesome. So my name is Joshua Sunberg. I originate from Southwest Iowa, so that's where I was born and raised. I was born into a farming family. My dad and grandpa farmed, and that's kind of what I grew up doing. Also, is I farmed and helped out around the farm, and I got into hunting when I was kind of younger. We had some family friends and stuff that would come by and be like, ask for permission to hunt. We had deer hunt, we had deer and quail and
Yeah,
pheasant and all that stuff. So pheasant hunting back when I was a kid was huge. I mean, absolutely huge when I was like 6 to probably about 10. And so
yeah.
guys would come knock on the door and I'd get to go out with them and, see how they hunted and watch the dogs work and all that stuff.
That's
Sometimes I
cool.
was the bird dog too, but
You gotta be right. You gotta be.
yeah,
That's awesome, man. I
yeah,
gotta ask. I hear Iowa. I've never hunted Iowa,
yeah.
but everyone always says you guys got the biggest whitetails. Do you remember having just like monster deer there, or like since you were an actual working farm, were the deer maybe
Yeah.
not as big as maybe some of those properties that are like just deer properties?
So what a lot of people I think get hung up on is they look at a property, they look at a cornfield that has basically no trees on it and look at it and be like, I can't like there's no deer out there. There's no reason to even go try to hunt that. And that's how our places, a lot of our places are, is it's like, yeah, cornfields and soybean fields with terraces, grass back terraces in them. And so that's what I grew up hunting. I didn't grow up hunting all these big timber blocks.
Yeah,
Um, and I'd see tons of deer. We'd see tons of deer growing up. I mean, the deer population was insane. It's not as good as it's definitely come down from its height because guys have taken out grass water lanes and wetlands when they're not supposed to and stuff like that. So like some of the CRP grasses have come out and hedgerows and all that stuff. They've taken all that stuff out too just to farm more acres. There's still big
gotcha.
bucks there. I mean, I grew up
Oh,
with
I'm
big
sure.
bucks. I've killed a lot of deer over 140 inches. So
Bad man.
and I've guided hunters on that stuff, and I can't even tell you how many times I brought hunters out and buddies out to come hunt our places, and they look at it and they just look at me like I'm crazy. Like, there's deer out here, and I'm like, yeah, there's deer out here, and then they'll come out, and they'll hunt it, and they'll be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I killed this buck here. So
Yeah, that's
I think it
cool.
just, yeah, I think a lot of guys just overshoot that and just don't, they're like, oh, it's not a big block of timber. It's like, it's not going to be any good, but that's not the case. So,
That's interesting, man. Yeah,
Yeah.
I got to get out to Iowa at some point and do some hunting. But, and you're in
Yeah.
Colorado now. Did hunting take you out
Yep.
there?
So work, yeah. So I'm also a wildlife researcher. So I do deer captures, elk captures, bear captures, whatever, kind of whatever. So
Yeah,
I put like GPS collars on animals. That's kind of my job. So I'm constantly
that's cool.
hunting them too. So yeah, yeah.
That
So
reminds me, for some reason, of a YouTube video. I bet you've seen it, but it's like
yeah,
they're chasing down elk in a helicopter, and the guy like jumps
yep,
out of the helicopter and like wrestles
yep,
an elk to the ground. Have you seen that
yep,
video?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm
Is
I'm
that is
trained to
that
be a
you
mu
in that video?
No, no, it's not me, but I haven't mugged, so but I've watched a mug and I'm certified to do it and all that fun stuff. And so I mean I'm trained to actually do that, but I've never got the opportunity to do it. I've done like everything else that you can imagine when it comes, using big drop nets to catch like anything from like bighorn sheep, deer, elk to, we'll use clover traps, which are like basically, like a mesh trap to catch the deer and then just ground darting them. So we use
Yeah.
an actual dart gun to catch them. But the range is like people don't realize that it's the dart guns, you can only shoot them 25 yards. So
Huh.
it's like you're really limited. It's almost like you're archery hunting. Like I mean, it's harder than archery hunting because you have to get so close to them. So
Huh. Interesting.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Man,
because the FPS on it is like so slow when you actually try to shoot something with it, it's tough.
huh, that makes sense. So,
Yeah.
is that all through like Cardinal Parks and Wildlife, or are you like a third party company that they like hire out, or how does that work? Sorry.
Yeah, so I don't work for I work for a university. I
Oh,
don't I don't
sweet.
really want I don't really want to say what university because that's a long story back up on that of why I'm here too. Uh yeah, but
Okay, okay. We
yeah,
won't get into that. I'm just
yeah.
gonna let you know I'm a Buffalo, and so I'm just gonna
Yeah.
assume that we don't like each other. But that's the
Yeah,
assumption.
yeah, yeah,
All
yeah, that's yeah, yeah.
right, all right. Well, let's get back on track, man. Let's get back on
Yeah.
track. You're here to tell some hunting stories, man. So
Yeah.
that's what my listeners came for. So why don't we set the stage? Tell us a little bit about like where you are on this first hunt, and let's dive into it, man.
All right, so I figured I'd start way early, back on my first hunt I ever did in my life, for big game. So my first deer hunt I ever did, which was in Iowa. Uh,
Okay.
so when I was a kid, um, I I broke my ankle. So I shot.
Ooh,
I was being a dumb kid, and I jumped off something I shouldn't have jumped off, trying to do a flip, all that fun stuff. And I broke my ankle, and I was in a cast, and uh, that was upcoming before hunting season ever even crossed my mind. And I ended up getting chicken pox on top of it right before hunting season. And so I
of
was I
course.
was dog sick, with chicken pox, and it was awful. And I'd gone through hunter safety, when I was 12. This was when I was 14, would have been my first hunting season. My dad basically was like, "Hey, you know what? Why don't me and you go out and like let's just go try to hunt, one of our places. Like, well, I'll just push some terraces. That's how you hunt in Iowa, You're
Yeah.
sitting there and you got guys they'll push a deer into you, That's just how everybody grows up hunting there, and you use a shotgun. So we
Like
go
double out
out.
buckshot, I'm assuming, or a slug.
No, we have to use slugs. You
Okay.
can't use double. Yeah, you can't use buckshot in Iowa. No. But yeah, we were using slug guns, so 12 gauge shotguns. So me and Dad
Okay.
went and shot before, or he was using a 16 gauge, one single shot. And I was using a pump, like a Remington. Was it the Remington 500s? So, or I have a Mossberg now. Is it Remington 500 or Mossberg 500?
I think it's a
I
Mossberg.
can't
So
even
I don't know.
remember.
I think I have like a Remington 810 or something. I don't know. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, but something like that. Yeah, something like that. I don't shotgun. I don't really. I'm not big into the shotgun anymore. Muzzleloader rifle and bow now.
Okay.
So, uh, anyway, I went out, took some shots at 100 yards with the guns, iron sights. Dad was hitting not so great, but I was doing okay. I was hitting a 12 inch by 12 inch, brand new to hunting, no clue what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So, because dad grabbed me and he's just like, let's go hunting. I'm just like, hunting? Why do we want to go deer hunting? We always see, there's deer everywhere. He's like, well, let's just go. So we end up going out. Yeah, yeah. It's funny because it's just like the session just like started after this. So we end up going out, we go to the spot, uh, and it's not very far. We just walked down this hedgerow and I sat down, and I'm not even kidding. We were sitting there maybe 10 minutes, and this buck starts running right at me. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. I'm like, there's a buck coming right towards me. And then all of a sudden he stops. He's like probably 200 yards out there. And I'm like, I at least knew enough then that I was like, okay, well, I can't shoot that far. That's really far. And a car drives by and sees this buck and on the gravel road probably, so it'd be a quarter mile away, because it was an 80 acre and then a 160 that we were on, and we were on the fence. We were kind of on a terrace next to the fence line, and he was just getting right up there along in the center of the 80 acres.
Okay.
So that car stops on the road, and the buck like just takes off running straight to us after it sees that car stop.
No way.
And I watched this person get out of the car. They had binoculars. They weren't hunting, but they got binoculars out. I'm like more interested in what the person's doing than what the deer is doing. I'm just like, what is this guy doing? And I'm like, oh, well, this buck's coming right to me. And so he finally runs up, and he's probably 50 yards away. And so I let him have it. I dropped this deer dead in his tracks. I mean,
Wow.
I stoned this buck. And I'm like, cool. Well, that was easy. 10 minutes into hunting, we drove
Yeah.
like less than a half, or it was like a half a mile away from my house. And I'm like, this hunting stuff's easy, whatever. This hunting stuff's easy. Well,
I think
this
I know how this
buck,
story goes. I've heard that a
yeah,
lot, and it always
yeah,
ends up in the same way. But go ahead.
yeah. So I start, I get over to the top of the terrace to walk down to this buck. He gets up and takes off running. And I didn't realize I hadn't jacked another shell in. And so, in the moment of panic, I'm like trying to get another shell in this gun. And I'm just like, I couldn't do it. By the time he was gone, I mean, he was 150 yards across the field, and I took a shot at him. It wasn't even close. I'm like, man, what in the world happened? Like, what? It just didn't make any sense to me. And so this buck just takes off running, and I go down and I look, and there's no blood. There's no blood anywhere. And I'm just like, this doesn't just make any sense. I'm like, I don't know what happened with this deer. And I tell dad, and dad's just like, well, let's just go somewhere else. Okay. And well, we ended up, because I was new to hunting. Neither one of us hunted that much, even my dad. So it wasn't like we wanted to like, we didn't even know to look for blood and blood trail or anything like that. But at least I looked, where I dropped it and along the fence line and stuff like that. But beyond that, I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
And so we took off and we went to another spot, and I sat down along the fence line, and it started snowing, and then a little bit of rain mixed in. And so I had to get a bag to put my cast in I had to get a bag to put my cast in and lay there on the ground. Like, I'm out there hobbling around, but just like trying to go on one foot. Like I have I'm like, it was super interesting trying to hunt with that cast and like get up and walk around with it. And like, yeah, I definitely was doing stuff I probably shouldn't have done with that cast with a broken ankle like that. But I was trying my hardest, because I was just like, okay, now I kind of want to get one. So dad drops me off in the truck, and I walk 50 yards to this other fence, and he comes around, he loops around, he walks all the way. I mean, this guy, he probably walked like 2 miles around just to walk this one terrace to me, and saw zero deer, no deer.
Huh.
And I'm like, man, no deer came out of anything. He didn't spook anything. so he loops back and we meet up and he's like, well, I think I should walk back. And I'm like, really? You think you should? And he's like, yeah, I think I should walk back and try to push this terrace again because you never know. There might have been one in there. I'm like, yeah, right. These deer see a person and, you know, they see that car stop on the road a quarter mile away and take off, or half mile away even, and take off running, sprinting the other opposite direction. I'm like, there's no way. Well, as he's starting to walk away, about 200 yards, this buck pops out and starts running the terrace straight to me, opposite of him. So he's like walking, so he'd be walking south, and the deer started running north towards me. And I'm like, okay. And this buck gets, he's like 100 yards away. I'm like, okay, it's about as far as what I was shooting. I'm like, I'm just going to wait because he's running. This buck is dead on a dead sprint.
I mean, I'm assuming this is the same deer, right? Like you can tell it's the same deer.
No, this is a different deer. So this is a completely different deer, completely different spot. I know but this is just novice hunting. Like I just need to tell this story to because I had no idea what I was doing.
Yeah.
So this deer is sprinting towards me, and I'm just like, okay, I can't shoot. And I'm not even kidding you. It got, so there's a fence, and then it's like this brome grass that goes to the terrace. And that deer got to that brome grass, and then he sees me and stops and then turns broadside about like he's about to take off, and I shoot him and I drop him, same as the last one. Yeah. So I re-rack. This time I was like, I'm not taking any chances. I re-rack and I shot him 2 more times. Cause we had plugs in our gun. Because that's another thing. It's like I didn't need to have a plug in my gun, but it's like I had plugs in my gun. Like there's a plug in the gun, so you can only have the 3 rounds. And then I reloaded, and but then I crawled over the fence, and Dad came back, and he's like, "Oh my gosh, that's awesome! You caught this one." And so it was awesome. It was like he's probably 130-inch 9-point, just a 3.5-year-old deer, younger deer, but yeah, it was pretty cool. And then, so we tagged that buck, get him in the bed of the truck. My dad had a buddy who processed. And so that's kind of how I learned how to process animals, is through this guy, Danny Robertson. And, so I kind of learned how to process things and the whole aspect of skinning and all that stuff. And it was a slow process, let me tell you what. But now it's second nature now. But so this story gets a little crazier, because I'm sitting there, and I think it was like 2 days later, and I'm sitting there, and my mom comes up to me, and I'm still sitting there with chicken pox. I'm like itching everywhere. So, but I'm sitting there, and we get a call from our neighbor, and he's like, "Hey, did you guys shoot a buck?" And we're like, "Oh no." We're like, "Yeah, we totally did," because we had quit hunting, and we each had a tag. So I don't know if you know how Iowa works, but you can party hunt in Iowa. So yeah, so during shotgun seasons, or they're called firearm seasons now, but so my dad can share his tag with me, and I can share my tag with my dad, or vice versa. So the neighbor calls, and he's like, "Hey, there's a dead deer back here." And we're like, "Oh my gosh, that's probably the deer that I ended up shooting at." And we get up to it. It's obliterated by coyotes. I mean, there's nothing left of this thing. But I look at it, and it looked like, so I hit the base of its antler, and that's why it dropped. And he must have just got some type of concussion or something from that, and that's how he ended up dying. Yeah. But we tagged that one too. So that one was, we tagged, Dad put his tag on that one, and because like I said, you can legally do that in Iowa, and we brought it home, and that one was so he was 144 inches, but he had 4 drop tines and a double main beam, and he was a really cool buck. Yeah, 21 scoreable points.
Wow.
So
that's a cool buck.
That's awesome, super man. Cool.
Yeah, your story reminded me of a couple things, man. So you're talking about and just not knowing, right? When you first start hunting. My first hunt I wasn't 10, so I don't have nearly as many excuses. I was like 30, 30, 31, 32.
Uh,
And man, I shoot my first elk with a muzzleloader, and the only thing they told me to do was reload your muzzleloader, and I never really
mhm.
thought why, right? So I reload it, and after I shoot, I hear someone yell through the woods, "Who just shot?" And I'm like, "Well, I shot." And it turns out it's my brother-in-law. So like like you shoot an animal, the next thing you should be doing is yelling as loud as you can through the woods. You just don't know what you don't know, and so like we're yelling, we're trying to find each other. So it's my brother-in-law, and we were
Mhm.
screaming through the woods. We eventually run into. He's like, "I shot an elk," and I'm like, "I shot one too." He's like, "I don't know where to shoot. I don't know where mine went." And I'm like, "I'm standing where I shot mine," and we're just screaming back and forth. Um, I ended up we ended up finding that elk. It only made it about 50 yards from where I shot it, and part of the reason for that is because my brother-in-law shot the same elk. So he shot it 5 yards
Oh my
broadside,
gosh.
just boom, like it was dead right then. I saw it again after seeing another elk that I passed up because behind that elk was a tent, and I was like, "Well, I can't
Mhm.
shoot. I can't take that shot." So I let that one run by, ran over to where it ran in the woods, turned around. There's another elk, shot that elk. Turns out it was the same elk. And it was alive for 45 minutes at 50 yards, but it
Mhm.
wasn't going anywhere. And you don't know.
Mhm.
Why did they have me reload my muzzleloader? At the time, I had no idea. Now I'm like, well, I should have shot it again if it was still on its feet, but I didn't.
Yeah.
I just let it stand there for 45. So, you don't know. You don't know
Yeah.
what you don't know.
Yeah. You're
Uh,
such, I mean, and that's the thing. It's like, it's such a learning, like hunting is just such a learning, it's just learned behavior between, animals and like talking with other hunters, listening to stories like this, even, it's just like that you have to share those stories so that people
yep.
like, they can grow in the sport and like figure things out for themselves. So,
Absolutely. 100%.
yeah.
Hopefully, you learn a mistake somebody else made. You have to make that
Yeah.
mistake yourself. But
Yeah.
and
If,
then
if,
another thing. Go ahead. Go ahead.
yeah, it's like if you shoot a deer, it's like you need to do everything physically possible to like look everywhere, follow the tracks in the snow if it comes to that, if you're sure you hit it, like how I dropped it, it's
Yeah.
just
Yeah,
like,
man.
and he only made it like half a mile, like three-quarter of a mile over the hill, the next hill towards the neighbors, you know,
Yeah.
and it's just
Yeah.
like, yeah, yeah. So he
That's
didn't, he
funny,
didn't,
man.
I mean, he made it a ways, but it was like, that was 100% the deer. So it was just like, but it's so crazy that just shooting him in the antler and he got concussed or something and that's how he died.
Yeah.
So
That's
yeah,
crazy. That's
yeah.
crazy. Well, your story also reminded me of one other story, and this one's not mine, so I'm not going to tell all of it, but I will. I'll tell you where to find it. So, episode 30 of my podcast, Jim Huntsman,
Hmm.
awesome guy, amazing story. And you were saying like you had the chicken pox and you had a broken leg or
Yeah.
you had a cast on and all that stuff. This guy, he had like surgery on his testicles, and he went deer hunting.
Oh,
And I'm gonna there's a lot to it, but the culmination of the story is he realizes when he's waist deep in a swamp that he had surgery on his nuts 2 days before, and I was just like, oh god, Jim. And so if I mean I know Josh, you haven't listened to that one, episode 30, you got to check it out. Awesome episode,
yeah.
listeners out there, check it out, guys. If you haven't listened to it, hilarious episode with Jim Huntsman. So, but yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there. But man, that's a great story, Josh.
Yeah.
Um, it's funny. The first hunts never go as smooth as you'd like. They never do.
No, they never do. No,
Yeah,
it's not. Yeah, definitely does not go anywhere what you think would ever come according to plan. For hunting
yeah,
somewhere new, or it's always seems like it's that way. So
for sure, man.
yeah,
Well, cool.
yeah,
Well, let's keep going. Let's keep going.
yeah.
You hit us with a good one. What else do you got? Give us set the stage for the next story.
All right. So I'm trying to think which one should I do. I'll do my bighorn sheep. I'll do my bighorn sheep. Which this hunt's actually on YouTube. So
Yeah,
but I have that one posted. Uh anyway, so uh I was looking at draw stats in Colorado for non-residents. I was sitting there one day and I'm just like looking at all these draw stats for non-residents, and I'm like, I always wanted to hunt sheep, and I'm just like looking through, and I have a sheep point, and it takes in Colorado it takes three preference points in the big draws to actually start to, to actually be able to start getting bonus points and be, have a chance to actually to actually draw a tag. So I'm like looking at that. I'm like, oh, well, it's going to take me, 2 more years. And, it's like, I can't remember, it's 100 or $150 per preference point in
Something like that.
Colorado.
It's pricey.
Yeah. 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 It's just like I put in for all these states. I always forget how much it actually is. But I'm like looking and I'm like, oh man, well, it's going to take me 2 more years. And I'm going to, and then I was like, oh, I was on not Hunt and Fool. What's the other one? Go Hunt. I was
Gotcha.
on Go Hunt, and I'm looking at, like I said, I'm looking at the stats and looking through everything. And I'm like, man, I can draw a U bighorn sheep tag for 2 preference points. I'm like, okay, awesome. Well, I'm gonna start putting in for this hunt.
Let me ask real
And
quick.
yeah,
Is that two? Because you can't even get in until you have three, or am I wrong on
right,
that?
right. And but it's preference up to that point. So it's
Okay.
like, so you can have 1 to 3 and still preference. It's a kind of weird. So there's only a couple hunts like that, like on the big scale. So like there's like a moose hunt here in Colorado that you can draw as a non-resident with like 2 preference points still.
Gotcha.
A lot of
Interesting.
people, a lot of
Okay.
people, a lot of people don't know that. After saying this, now there's going to be some guy with 3 points that's going to put in now, and it's going to take, But
Yeah.
good luck to you, man. Good luck to whoever does that. So, but
Yeah. They gotta
yeah,
find it first. We won't tell them what
yeah,
unit.
yeah,
We'll let them
yeah.
know that
Well,
it's
it
out
doesn't
there.
take too much work, but you can see that with the U bighorn sheep,
Yeah.
and so like you can actually still draw a couple units here with you know 2 preference points. So I was like, man, you know what? That'd be pretty cool. So I put in for that. I put in for that tag, and with 1 point, and I'm like, well, I'm just gonna put in for it. You never know. And so the draw comes and goes, and I didn't get the tag. And so I'm like, whatever. But at this point, I'm working a bighorn sheep job in Montana. So I'm putting GPS collars on bighorn sheep lambs. We literally go up there and we capture these lambs,
Yeah.
and then put a little GPS transmitter on them that correlates to their mother's collar. So we actually catch the mom too and put the GPS collar on mom beforehand.
Huh. Okay.
And then put like their vaginal implant transmitters that we put in them, and then when they give birth, those come out, so we know when they give birth. So we go up there and catch the lambs. So anyway, the connection to that story
That's
is,
a lot of information, Josh. Thank you.
yeah. Well, hey, it's biology, man.
It
It's
is
wildlife
biology.
research. It's like wildlife research. That's how
Okay.
that's some people don't
Yeah.
know how you do it.
We just got
So
to
it's
mix
like,
in a little science with some
yeah, you got to
vaginal
mix.
tracking devices, I
Yeah,
guess.
yeah, that's what you have to. That's how you get a lot of these animals. I mean, they do these research projects everywhere, and it's like,
Huh.
yeah, you put those things in, and that's when they give birth. That's when they come out. So it's really helpful when you're trying to catch those young animals, because a bighorn sheep, once it's 24 hours old, it'll climb mountains better than any of us can. I mean,
No way.
it will.
How do you know that it's fallen out? The device in question. How do you
Yeah.
know that it's time to go collect?
So basically, they have a light sensor on them, they have a temperature
Um.
sensor on them, and then they have a distance, um, like a distance from the collar. So once it's
Okay. That all
out
makes
of,
sense.
yeah. So then once light and temperature go off, that's our, like, we got to go. And we get
Yeah.
notifications. Like, it literally just gets sent to us via email on our phone. Like, sometimes they'll text us to it on our phone, all that fun stuff. But
Gotcha.
we literally are glued to that thing when it's like we're trying to catch lambs or fawns or elk calves or whatever. And it's
That's
like
crazy.
sometimes
Okay.
sometimes you have to have miles out there to get them. But anyway, so I was doing this job, and I'm hiking in all this crazy sheep country in Montana, and just I'm getting in awesome shape. And I get a call from CPW, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, for people who don't know, and they call and they say, "Hey, the guy who put in, who had 2 preference points, drew another tag in California for a ram, and he turned his tag back in. Do you want this tag?
Oh,
And I'm
interesting.
like,
So it doesn't go back to like the lottery or like the leftover tag list. They call the next guy on the list.
right. So
Huh.
that's what they did. That's what they did. And so I was like, of course. I'm like, oh my gosh. So now I'm like, I got this tag with 1 point, and I've driven by the unit. I've e-scouted it, but I've never like driven in the area before, other than like I drove by on the interstate.
Yeah.
So it's like I've seen this mountain range before, but like I said, I've never been in it. So now I'm sitting here, I'm like, oh my gosh, now I'm all excited because now I got a summer scout. And um the story gets a little crazier too. So I started working another job while I was up in Montana, pretty fun one. I don't know if you looked through my Instagram too much, but I started working for the Yellowstone production. So Yellowstone, the
Oh,
TV show.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So I started doing some extra stuff on that just to make, you don't make a lot of money in wildlife conservation or research. So it's like I was trying to make some supplemental income too. So I started working on the show, doing some extra background stuff. And yeah, but anyway, I ended up getting that job. And so I was busy with that now. And so like I was doing that and the sheep stuff. And I had zero time to go scout my area. But lo and behold, so normally it's a really easy hunt. So there's a main road that goes all the way up to this, 13,000 foot peak.
Yeah.
And they shut that road down, federally
Huh.
closed it, shut down. There was like straight line winds or a tornado or something. I don't know if they ever figured out exactly what it was, but blew all these trees down. And so they closed that road down. And so now I'm sitting here, I'm like trying to figure out how to get in this area. I'm like sitting here, I'm like, oh my gosh, how do I even get in here? Like, I'll just hike the road. Well, come to find out, you can't just hike that. They literally, the Forest Service like made it so that way you're not even legally allowed to hike the road in there. Like
Wow. I didn't
it's
know you could do
it's
that.
it's illegal.
Okay.
I didn't know they could do that either. But this is like I have this on my YouTube video. They have a sign there that like you're not like no unauthorized person to even walk up that road. And the trails were shut down, like all the hiking trails back up into the other side to the north were all shut down. But there
Yeah.
was one lone road on the south hand side that you could hike all the way in there, like 7 miles to this peak. But it's like, I mean, your elevation is insane in there. And so
Anywhere you're
I,
gonna find rams, and yeah, absolutely
yeah,
crazy
yeah,
elevation.
yeah. So, but this is a U hunt. This is a U hunt. This is a U, not a ram. But
Okay, got it. Sorry.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So anyway, luckily I was in really good shape, and so I I went out like 3 days, or I think it was like 3 days before season, and I ended up going up this road, and it was, all these trees had blown over it, and they like people had already cut them out, like all the elk hunters, because it was getting close to elk season and for archery, and so they had already cut all these trees out of the way on this road, which was really nice. And so anyway, I got almost to the top of it, and I camped up there, and then hiked. I ended up hiking all the way in there, and that was tough. It was all shaly rock, just
Yeah.
yeah, it was crazy side hilling. But I got in there that first day, and I brought my tent with me, and I camped up there, and I ended up finding quite a few ewes that afternoon. So I found a giant big group of lambs and ewes, glassed through them all. There were some really nice old mature ewes that didn't have any lambs. I'm like sitting there. I'm like, oh, this is gonna be slam dunk. Like this is gonna be nice and easy.
Quick meat hunt. Yep.
Yeah, a quick meat hunt. And so then I back out. I'm like, okay, this is gonna be awesome. So then my other buddies, I had some awesome buddies. My buddy Harley from Kansas, Leo from Nebraska, and Landon, which he's moving to Idaho now, but we met in Iowa. Anyway,
Yeah.
they came out, and they were awesome. I just was like, hey, would anybody want to come help me on this hunt? And they were just like, absolutely. So these guys came out, and which is so cool, so cool. I just put a word out on Facebook, and these guys were like instantly like, yes. Um, so they came out, and yeah, we got camp all set up, and I looked back around, and I can glass the mountain in some points from a couple miles away, and so I'm glassing up all the mountains, and I saw two sheep the next day, and then that big group was gone. I mean, just gone. And
Oh,
there's
of
so
course.
the way, yeah, so the way this ridge works, this mountain range works, is one side of it is all public, and the other side is all private. So you can't even like hike on the peaks. You have to hike on the side hills
Okay.
because
That's
because it's
okay.
private. So it's private on the tops. It's really goofy, and it's like no signs, no nothing. And so you have to be super careful in that unit not to, go up on one of those edges or anything, because
Yeah.
to actually like kind of look over. But uh so I'm sitting there, I'm like, gosh darn it. I'm like, oh no, this is, I'm always thinking, I was thinking the worst. I wasn't very I mean, I was optimistic, but I wasn't super. I got a little nervous when that big group was gone, because this is where
Yeah.
they're supposed to be all the time, 24/7, like never supposed to be out of this area. And from what I all read online and everybody else had said, and the biologists and everything like that. And so I back out of, we get out of there, and um, we're sitting there before opening day, just having a ball. And I was like, all right, well, we'll give it a go in the morning. So we hike up the trail in the morning, because I had hiked all that way, all the way back out, that 7 miles
Yeah.
back out.
Damn. Okay.
And yeah, yeah. And so we hike up in the morning, and Leo and Harley, I think it was after the first half mile, because they hadn't hiked up there with me yet. Neither had landed. And they're like, we can't do it. Like, there's no way. And it was the first half mile. And so they're like, we're gonna stay in camp. We're gonna stay in camp. I'm like, okay, okay. And so he's like, just
We
call us,
can't do it.
text
Yeah.
us, or yeah. He's like, and reach us when you're like when you get. I'm like, okay, cool. And so Landon comes with me, and Landon was in pretty good shape. So he was trying to push me to go up the hills. He's just like, come on, we gotta go. I'm like, oh, let's take it nice and easy. Take it nice and easy. And he's just like, let's go, let's go, let's go. He was all jacked up. And I'm like, I'd already hiked all the way out here, so I kind of knew what to expect. I'm like, let's just take it easy, man.
Yeah.
So, so we're going up the hill, and or we're going up the mountain on this shale, and I'm like, I'm feeling my chest. I'm feeling my chest. I'm like looking. I'm like, did I have my binoculars on? And my
Oh
buddy's like,
no.
he's like, what? I'm like, did I? So I have the Furies, the Vortex Furies, the range-finding binoculars.
Oh.
And
Oh my God.
he's like, I thought I heard something. And
Oh
I'm like,
God.
you thought you heard? And I'm like, did they? I'm like when we were walking up, he's like, yeah. I'm like, and I thought about it. I'm like, man, I thought I heard like a rock fall all the way down to the bottom, I mean, 1,000 foot down, like 1,500 feet down. And I'm like sitting there, and he's looking at me, and I'm
Oh,
looking at
why didn't you
him, and
say
I'm like,
anything?
we neither one of us even like it didn't register through our mind. We just thought it was a rock. Well, turns
Yeah.
out it ended up being my binoculars. And he's like, don't worry, I've got the Furies too. I'm like, okay, cool. I didn't know that he had them at the time. And so so we were still hiking up there, and we ended up going back and looking around in this area where I thought it fell off, and we're like, we're just spending, and it was just, we were in a cloud, so the clouds would come over, and like we couldn't see anything. I got a
Of
picture.
course.
I'll have to show a picture of this.
Yeah.
But
Please.
yeah, so we're going through, and it's like super thick clouds, and my buddies were like, oh, it's really clear, nice and clear down here. There's only a cloud up where you guys are at along the whole mountain range. I'm like, oh, great, perfect, that's awesome. And so he sends me a Snapchat. I had service, he had service, so he sent me a Snapchat, and it's just like the whole mountain range is completely covered in clouds. I'm like, oh, great. So I was like, oh, whatever, we'll still hike out there. We'll camp out there if we have to. So we had left at 2 a.m. and we had gotten like a couple, like 4 miles in by like, I want to say it was like 9 o'clock or something like that.
Oh man.
And yeah, it was brutal. It was brutal. I was already beat from the first time I went in there. And so we hiked along the bottom portion of that ridge and kept moving along on the public side, and we get up to this point and the clouds just like moved out perfect just for a split second. They all just moved out and we could see quite a bit of this valley with shale and everything. And we look over and there's a ewe, a ram, like a ram lamb, and another ewe. And we were looking at them, and they're across the valley from us. And I'm glassing these sheep up, and I'm like looking at them. I'm like, okay, cool, cool, this is awesome. And I'm like, but I'm gonna hold out. Like the one ewe was really really big. She was really nice, and I was like, I'm gonna hold out. I'm not gonna shoot her yet. And she was like 500 and something uh meters, by the way,
Yeah.
meters away. That'll come into play later. Uh
Oh no.
yeah. And so we end up going up the rock face, and we get up to the spot, and I look over and it's still cloudy and everything's kind of trying to clear up. Not really, but it's still, you can see the sunny on all the hillsides out in the background, and you're just like, it's perfectly sunny everywhere else but where we're at. I'm
Yeah.
like, okay. And so we're at like, we're up there, we're probably at 13. I think we were at right at 13,000 feet. And we're sitting there. And so I was like, we'll crawl down. So we crawled down probably about 200 vertical feet and got just below some of the clouds. And we're like on this big rock, and it's just like straight down. I mean, it's like 600 or 700 feet just straight down. It's
Oh,
unreal. I mean, it was just
yeah.
like steep, some of the steepest country I've ever been in. And I like look over this thing and I'm like, ooh, I'm like, that's pretty far down there.
Yeah.
So it starts to clear up and I see where, all those other sheep were supposed to be. And I look and there's none. There's absolutely zero. And so this ewe and the other two, they come up and I'm like looking at them and I look at this ewe and she looks super old. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, there's no other sheep. And then so they start working their way up the valley and they're like gonna go shoot up to the private. I'm like, this is my shot. Like I'm like, this is my sheep hunt. And I'm just like, this, if they go over onto the private, because I thought that those were potentially the two, there was probably three of them there, but I just didn't see the other one because it was bedded and it was only those two. And so I was like, oh my gosh. So these were the three sheep I saw the other day. And if they go over, like I don't know if I'm gonna find any more. So this you so she starts heading up and I look at my buddy and I'm like, hey, can you? I'm like, let's range it. And after I'd had him at like 160 yards, but it was like, it was like straight down. Like if I would have shot her where she was at, she would have gone off that cliff and been completely busted up. There would have been nothing left of that sheep.
Yeah.
So I mean, just absolutely nothing. And so she works her way across, and I'm like, "Can you range that for me?" And he ranges it. He's like, "Yeah, it's 400 and something. I can't remember. I've got it on my video because at the time I remembered when I was editing the video, like the yard or the ranges." I'm like, "Okay, cool." And so I set in and I get ready, and I'm like, "Okay, I'm just gonna wait for her to turn a little bit more." And she starts coming up. She starts coming towards us, and then she stops. I'm like, "All right, perfect." I shoot, completely miss her. I'm like, what in the world? I didn't know where I shot and high, left, whatever. I'm just like, that doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense. My rifle just should be dead on. Like my rifle should be dead on. Like I've shot this thing, 700, 800 yards, no problem. I'm like, it was like 400 and something, or maybe 500. I'm like, I should have smoked that ewe. And she starts running towards us, and I'm like, okay, well, she starts coming up the hill towards us, and he ranges it again. It was 400 and something there. I know that. And I'm like, okay. And so she stops, and I shoot, and I shot the back of her flank, and I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, I felt so bad. I was like, that just doesn't make any sense. I watched the bullet drop like crazy. I'm like, that just doesn't make any sense. So I rack another one in, and I'm like, okay. And I just didn't even listen. I just corrected. I'm like, I'm just gonna hold a little bit higher. And I shot, and because she had like turned away from us. I shot. I just smoked her. And I'm like, oh, that's just crazy. And so I'm like, man, like we start celebrating. I start screaming, she's down,
Yeah.
everything's good. I'm like, this is awesome, like so great. And I'm like, man, I just don't understand why my yardage was off. And he just like looks at me and he's like, yardage? And I'm like, yeah, yardage. I'm like, yeah, it was like 400 whatever yards. And he's like, oh, I shoot meters.
Okay.
And so he was ranging in meters and I was dialing in yards. So I was
Yeah.
dialing my scope for yards and he was ranging in meters. So I was just that far off, and probably with me,
Yeah.
not,
No, I
canting the
get it,
rifle
man.
or whatever, it was just like that. And yeah, it was. And I was just like, I looked at him, I'm like, seriously? He's like, yeah. I'm so glad I got the sheep though. I'm like,
Yeah, dude,
okay.
I mean, I'm amazed that
Oh,
you were able to just sort of aim high and figure it out and take that shot. So I saw this coming,
yeah,
Josh. So
yeah,
I did the math. I'm just taking 450. Is like if he were to
yeah,
say 450
yeah,
and he's going meters, that means you were
yeah.
shooting 492, or
Right.
that's 492 yards is the actual
Yeah,
distance at 450
yeah,
meters. So if you were shooting
right.
450 meters, you were only shooting 411, or excuse me, 450 yards. You only shooting 411. It's like a 40-yard difference is substantial.
Yeah. Yeah,
That makes
at those
sense, man.
distances, you start getting, and a bighorn sheep, they're not very, their shaft cavity isn't very big,
Yeah.
you know. So it's just, yeah. So that's what happened in that one. But we ended up getting down to her. We got some awesome pictures. We grabbed her and we hiked down, and we were like, well, we're not hiking across that shale again. I'm like, we're gonna go down. There's a trail in the bottom. Like, we're gonna pray it's not blown over, from because we could see all the blowover from everything. Like everything was blown over. And so
Yeah.
like we're just gonna hope and try to push through this stuff. Because we were like, oh, the elk hunter, elk hunting starts in like a couple days. So we're like, okay, the elk hunters are probably gonna be like moving through this stuff, cutting trees and actually trying to get through some of these trails that are legally accessible compared to the north side. And so we get down to the trail, and yeah, it was perfectly cut. Somebody had perfectly cut the thing because to
That's
get in
awesome.
there to elk hunt. And yeah, so we just hiked all the way down that. And yeah, Landon got behind a couple miles after that. I was able to bet that because I had saved my energy. He's sprinting up these hills, and I'm just like kind of walking. And yeah, and
Yeah.
then he when we started packing out, he was just like he was dead. He was pretty far behind me, and I was dead too. But I sat there at the trailhead, and Leo and Harley came up, and they're like, oh, we're gonna go help him. And so Leo took off, and he met him like a mile. He was like a mile and a half behind me, and
No
he
way.
grabbed it. Yeah, so he grabbed the pack and just kept going. But yeah, he was just like he's like, no, just go ahead, Josh, just go ahead. And, he's like, just come back if you can and try to help me. I'm like, okay. But luckily, Leo was able to go back in and grab his pack and help him out. So,
Yeah. God, that's
but
awesome. That's a great
yeah,
story, man. That's
yeah,
fun. I'm glad you killed that you, especially with that yardage
oh
meter
man.
distance. It
But
takes a good hunter to do that.
yeah,
I can't guarantee that I would have accomplished the same thing under the same
yeah.
circumstances.
Yeah, no, that was terrible, but that's not it. So
Uh
I lost my
oh.
binos. I lost my binos. I
Yeah.
lost they're almost $2,000. Like that's
Yeah.
they're 1,500 I think now. But anyway, I I was like I'm gonna go try to find those things. I'm like I'm gonna go hike up there and I'm gonna go look one more time. And so I
Is this the
hike
same
in.
day like you got in there,
No,
dropped your
no,
bag
no, no,
off?
no. I was like,
Okay.
I'm dead. Yeah, I was dead. I was
Okay.
done. No, this was the next morning. So
Okay.
we went back to camp. I processed all the meat. I ate all that stuff, and so I finished all that, and I was like, I got to go look for these things. And I told these guys, I'm like, I got to go look for them. So I took the trail off and went down in there. And I was like, well, I think this is where I remember, that tumbling happening. And I look and I'm just looking through. I'm like, there's just rocks everywhere. I'm like, there's no way. I'm like, I'm never going to find these things. And so I just walked back and forth and back and forth and up and down through these rocks. And I'm like, I just got exhausted. So I went down and I like started walking walk along the bottom, and I sit there for a second. I'm just sighing, just like ah, and I just look over, and there they are, just set. It looked like somebody had
No
just like
way.
set them there. Looked like somebody had just set them there, like set them down there, and they were just laying on top of this rock. And I was like, oh my gosh. And they were beat up. Like, let me tell you, those things were beat up. So I had to send them in. I sent them into Vortex, but they were pretty
They
beat.
take care of
But
you?
yeah, yeah, oh yeah, yeah, lifetime warranty. So
That's awesome.
they're
Real quick,
super cool
like
about that.
when you looked through them, did they still range?
I didn't try it because the inside, the glass was loose, so like it would
Oh, okay,
shake. But I didn't try
gotcha.
range. No, I didn't try ranging them after that. No, but
That
the
makes
glass
sense.
was
Sense.
loose. You couldn't even really look through them.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
but they
So
were they
they
were
took a
beat up.
spill. Okay,
Yeah, it
cool,
took
man.
a
Well, that's
long spill,
crazy.
but yeah, yeah,
Man, I have a
yeah.
buddy who went hunting. We went elk hunting. It was 2 seasons ago. I fell on opening day, ended up jacking up my back, and I was out for months. But he went back out by himself solo hunting, and he dropped a pistol.
Mhm.
He doesn't remember when or how, but he combed for days. Like he spent more time combing for that pistol than he did elk hunting, and he did not find it. So,
Uh,
you are
yeah.
lucky, man, because he knew like a rough area, but
Uh-huh.
no, he had no luck. He
Yeah.
didn't
Yeah.
nothing. So
Yeah, I know all
so
my buddies they couldn't believe it. They're just like, and I was back pretty quick. Like it wasn't like I wasn't gone for like 6 or 7 hours. I was gone for like 3 or 4 hours to get up back up to that point. I hammered down to that spot. I just
that's
freaking just
crazy.
looked at the ground and just went right there. But I just took water. I took water basically. I didn't take all my stuff that I,
Yeah.
did the first time, and I didn't have my rifle with me or anything like that. I literally just took water and just my in reach and just went right down there. So
Yeah.
that made it a
Cool,
lot
man.
easier.
Yeah. Well, that's a great story with a
Yeah.
awesome like +1 happy ending. So that
Yeah.
was a good one, man.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, it's always
Yeah.
awkward transitioning from story to story, but what else you got, man? These are great so far. I'm enjoying myself, and if that's it, we can wrap it right there. But if you got another one, I'm going to listen to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So I I guess I'll talk about one of my Wyoming elk hunts. Um so I I had a couple buddies. Okay, let me start over.
Okay.
So I've hunted this spot quite a bit over the years. I've killed a lot of elk in there. I killed a bull in there this year actually. Um, I killed a pretty nice bull in this spot, and was fortunate enough to draw a tag again this year. And
Nice.
anyway, I this was a couple years back, but I stopped hunting this spot in like December and January for cow season because of this. Um, so I I invited a couple of my family friends out to come cow elk hunting, and they came out with me one year, and they all filled their tags. Well, the next year they came out, and none of them filled their tags. Um, but I was fortunate enough to kill. I killed one cow, and so the story of how it goes is pretty crazy. So we we had gotten permission to access some of this private land, and it was only 640 acres, so it wasn't very big, but it bumped up
Okay.
to some public land, another 640 that it bumped up to. And so we had this area where the elk will come down in winter, and where I was pretty, they always come down there almost every year at some point. And luckily for us that we hit it just right, and there were elk out in the one spot, and but they were on a separate section of private land, that we couldn't get permission for. There's probably, I want to say there was probably about a herd of 300 elk out there.
Oh man.
It was pretty big. It was a nice herd of elk, and they were super, like everyone on the highway could see them. And so we're sitting there, we're watching them. We went and hunted other spots, but we're watching them, and we're like, okay, at some point they're going to transition over onto the it was landlocked public, so it was like they had that private section and then behind it was the public that was landlocked, so you couldn't even access it
Okay.
unless you had permission on that private piece. And so we knew they were going to start heading to that public at some point. It's just a matter of time. And so we just waited, we waited a day, and then no, they didn't come over, but we were hunting other stuff and weren't having any luck. Like, this is the herd we, kind of wanted to keep our eyes on and hunt 100%. And we come by and back by, and we just see the herd just running everywhere. I mean, it's just, normally when there's an elk herd, they all stick together, they're not just running crazy wild everywhere. And we're like, oh my gosh, why are these elk running everywhere? Well, we look over and there's two guys standing on the highway, 500 yards away from these things, just boom, 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 just shooting away. I mean, just flock shooting these things
No
from
way.
500
Into
yards.
private. Are they in private or public?
Into private, yeah. The
Yeah.
private. They're all
Okay.
private. These elk are on private.
Of
And
course.
so we're like, what in the world? And we look, and the guys have Wyoming plates. And so they're residents. And we're like, what in the world are these guys doing? So we're like, we just assumed they had permission. And so we're like, okay, whatever, I guess. And so we loop back around. Some of the herds are starting to split off and go onto the public, and then onto that private piece we had permission on. And so we work our way around, and we get to over there, and all of a sudden we just hear sirens and everything, and here comes the sheriff, here comes the game warden, one of the game wardens, and then here comes some town cops from this one town that we were hunting near. I mean, it was just wild. There were police coming out like crazy. We're just like, what in the world? Why are the police coming out for this? These guys are just they're just being dumb, flock shooting elk. And we're like, well, they must have shot a lot more than they should have. And so we're looking out, and dude, we just start seeing wounded elk, bulls, cows, spikes, everything, calves wounded. And we're like, oh
Jesus.
my gosh, it was bad. It was terrible. And we're just like looking at all these elk that are out there, and we're just like, oh my gosh. And so none of these elk ended up actually coming on to that public piece or that private piece. And we're like, oh darn. And so we sat there and we're just like, oh, this is such a bummer. And we're like, oh, well, this is terrible. Well, I guess we went up and talked with them, and they're like, yeah, they flock shot elk. And each one of these resident hunters, they each only had one cow tag each, and they had shot bulls and spikes and cows and calves, and yeah, it was terrible.
I assume
so,
they were what's what I'm looking for. They were caught, right?
No, I have no idea whatever happened. I never saw anything on the news. I never saw anything anywhere about it. Nothing.
That's crazy.
I know. It just blows my mind. I should have asked the game wardens there again about what happened, but I'm like, we never heard anything about it afterwards. So, I mean, I don't know whatever transpired for that, but so
that's crazy, man. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I actually have a similar experience. When you're done, remind me, and I'll tell you a little bit about mine.
Yeah. So anyway, so my buddies end up, they're like, well, we're done. There's no other elk. Like, these elk are gone. Yeah. And so my buddies, they pack up, they leave, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna hunt. I'm here. I'm gonna hunt a couple more days, and it started getting really cold. So I hunted the next day out there, and I was on another public chunk out there hunting, and I ended up finding a cow, and I shot a cow, and lo and behold, it had already been shot. So they had already, it was one of the ones that the guy had wounded. So, but the meat, everything was still great. So I was content, but at least got one of those out of the way. And some guy ended up shooting a giant bull right off the road that was wounded. I actually watched it happen. I pulled up, and the bull looked like it was sleeping. The bull literally looked like it was dead. I mean, it looked like it was dead, but it was just sleeping. And
no way.
Yeah. So the guy got out of the truck and started walking to it, and because he wanted to go get the antlers, and the bull just jumps up and takes off, running, but he's wounded. And so, yeah, the guy gets out, grabs his rifle, freaking runs out there. He didn't have it loaded or anything. Like he's trying to load his rifle. This bull just keeps running. And he's just like, he finally gets it loaded. And this bull's like 300 yards out there and he shoots once and just drops the thing. It was pretty cool. It was a big bull.
Wow. How
Yeah,
big you
but
think?
he was like 360.
Whew, that's a big
So
bull.
yeah, yeah. So it was one of the ones that those guys had wounded. So he would have never got that bull if it wasn't for that. But that was pretty cool watching that. And
That's
then
crazy, man.
yeah, and then so anyway, I get my cow, and I'm like, well, I'm gonna go run up this other road just for the fun of it. I'm gonna go see if there's any elk up here, and just to let people know or whatever, and just for fun. I just always just love going and running around. Well, I go up the road, and I'm like, oh, I hear a weird noise out of my truck. I'm like, oh, this is not good. And so like I'm like, oh well, I'll just go back to town, and it starts getting worse and worse and worse and worse. I'm like, oh man, I don't know what I did to my truck, but I messed it up going up this road to look at these elk. And I get back to the town, and uh yeah, I'd busted my CV axle completely, and then it had broken into my it had like broken into like underneath my ball joint. It was bad. Like it just
Man.
ruined everything in there. So I'm like, ah, great. But yeah, I ended up getting stuck there for with my elk. So I had to I dragged her out on a sled. So I
Okay.
gutted her, dragged her out on a sled. Which now I know I'll never do that ever again. I'm always gonna quarter them. Well, I'll drag it out on a sled, but I'm always gonna quarter them, debone them, have that done because of this. So I bring this cow out on the sled and I put it on my truck, and I'll have to find the picture but I'm like, great. Now I'm stuck here in the middle of Wyoming, and fun thing is a blizzard just moved in and they shut down the interstate. They shut down the highways. They shut down every possible road to get in and out of here. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So no one can tow me. I can't get it repaired. The town's too small. It doesn't have a repair shop. And so I'm just like, and I can't order in any parts, obviously, because of the
Yeah.
blizzards. So I'm like, great. So I'm stuck here. So I sat there for like 5 days, I think it was. And one of the roads finally opened up. So one of my buddies from Northeast Wyoming,
Wait, when
he
you say you
came
sat there
down.
for 5 days, you mean in town,
Yeah.
not just like in your
Yeah.
truck on the side of
Yeah.
the
No,
road.
no, no. I sat there. Luckily I was in
Okay.
town. I didn't sit in my truck. I've
Okay.
had stuff like that happen before, but luckily not. Luckily it wasn't on this trip. But yeah, so my buddy drove down, and I still had this whole elk, man. But I mean, it was freezing cold. It was so cold and the
Yeah.
snowy. But we got my truck and the elk and brought it up there to Northeast Wyoming, and I found a processor up there, and I was just like, after everything that happened, I'm just like, I always process my own game for the most part, and I was just like, I'm just dumping this thing off at the processor,
Yeah.
and it had been frozen solid. And so he put it in the cooler, and he's like, I don't know what to do. He's like, it's going to take like a week or a couple days for this to thaw out. I'm like, well, at least my truck's in the process of getting fixed, so that's going to take a while too. So I was able to get a rental truck. But yeah, that was a whole mess. But let me tell you, the looks we got with my truck, and I had like a hitch and haul with my cow on it on the back of my truck.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so I had like a hitch and haul with my cow on the back of it, and like it was on a trailer, and we were driving out of there, and it's just the looks I got were it was hilarious.
That's
It was
awesome,
so
man.
funny. Yeah,
That's a hell of a story, man.
but
But
yeah,
minus the hunter shooting, but like that reminded me of something that
yeah,
happened to me once. I
yeah,
was it was third season rifle in Colorado, so like mid early November, and it's like opening day, and we're hiking. We don't realize that there's roads everywhere, and we could probably just drive our trucks. So we're hiking. We put in 15 miles this day. It was ridiculous. My hips have never hurt so bad because you got a high like. Everyone complains about downfall. Well, knee
yeah,
deep snow is the same thing as downfall.
yeah,
Like it just feels
100%.
awful. It's in
Yeah,
it's worse. Either way,
yeah,
that's not the story. The story is that like opening day, we're walking up this hill, and we're looking at this mountain. Won't name the mountain, but a herd of like 400 elk come storming over this thing, and we're just like in awe. Like we were sitting there watching a coyote chase some mule deer, and we're like, "Oh, that's pretty cool." And we look to our left because we hear like thunder, and it's a herd of elk, probably about a mile away.
Oh my gosh.
Just coming up and like from not being visible on the backside of the mountain up and over, and we're looking at this, and all of a sudden we just hear gunshots, and we see where the gunshots are coming from, and these guys are just firing, and they're probably, I don't know how close your hunters were when they were firing, but like 1,200 yards is our guess.
Oh
as to
my
how far
gosh.
these guys were. Like they were not close. They were just ripping bullets into this herd. And we got up there eventually. We had to keep going. We're like, hey, there's so many damn elk. I was like, we'll just go up there and we'll follow their snow tracks. We'll eventually find something. So we hike up there. When we get up there, we start seeing just blood everywhere. At one point, like 4 or 5 cows came charging out of the woods 5 yards from us and shot right in front of us and ran down into some other trees. And we just heard trees snapping and cracking. It was just absolute chaos. So I've lived an experience of guys just like ripping. I mean, not just one shot, but we're talking, I think we heard probably 40 rounds between 3 guys. Absolutely insane.
And not even knowing where you're going to hit. Like, that's just crazy.
There's no way. And the distance they were shooting, I was like, I couldn't shoot that distance if the animal was standing there, but these ones were just running. It was absolute chaos. And it gave me just a disgusting feeling in my gut, and you probably felt similar when you saw those guys taking that. So
and all the elk they were picking up. I mean, it was like the game and fish were picking up all these elk. And it was crazy, like it was just like, that's and crazy. It's crazy. What's crazy is it just never. If somebody could find something about this, like, or maybe an article. I don't know how many of your listeners like are really good at digging stuff up, but. Or, maybe something that somebody was charged with like multiple counts of shooting off a highway and like shooting over their bag limit and all that stuff. But you'd think the news would have picked that up. Like it would have been big news, but
I don't know. I'm wondering the separation, and this is something I don't know, but like the separation between like regular police blotter and like, because that falls under the game warden and not the police, I would assume.
Yeah, well, no, there were 3 game wardens there.
Yeah,
I mean, it was
like, is there like a game warden blotter, right? Like you can see what the police have done. They post that in the newspaper. There's a police blotter. You go see what was done in the last whatever. But is there something equivalent for game wardens? I don't know. That's something I need to get game warden on here.
Yeah. That it'd be interesting to know if there was something like that out there that would. Yeah, because I would have loved to see what those guys ended up getting, because it had to be a lot.
I would just like to hope that they don't ever have a hunting license ever again. Like,
yeah, I mean, it's just like crazy.
At a minimum.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Either way. Okay. Well, Josh, that was another awesome story. Like, you're not disappointing. I know you mentioned maybe you had a bear story. If not, we can just wrap it up and we can tell the people where to find you. I heard some Instagram and YouTubes and stuff. You tell me. What do you want to do? Another story or wrap it up?
I guess. Yeah, I don't know if I want to share that one. We'll do
that one offline or save it for another episode.
Yeah. I gotta really. I'll send you pictures of this one, but you're gonna be there's a really good hunt story that I had about a hunt that I did down in Texas, but
okay.
But yeah, I better get going. So
okay, all right, man. Well, let's do this then. Well, first off, I want to say thank you, Josh. This was a ton of fun. Your stories were unique and entertaining as hell, and I hope that you get on more podcasts after this. But let's tell the people where they can find you, man. So if people want to find Josh and see what you're up to, because I mean, you had musk ox and caribou and all sorts of other cool shit on your Instagram. So tell the folks where they can find you.
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram as Joshua Sunberg. So my first and last name. You'll probably have this on the podcast itself, up on the header probably. So if you'll literally just Google Joshua Sunberg, or put in Instagram Joshua Sunberg. That's me, and then Joshua Sunberg on Facebook, and Joshua Sunberg Outdoors on YouTube. So
Perfect, man. And
Yep.
as usual, I'm going to put all the links to all that stuff in the show notes, make it really easy for people to find it. So go ahead and check
Yep.
Josh out. Like I said, guys, he's got some crazy hunts. Way crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
not crazier than the stuff you told us, but you've got some awesome hunts, and you've been doing it a long time. So, Josh, thank you for your time, man. I really do appreciate it. And yeah, man, I think maybe we'll have to do another episode in the future. We'll run that Texas one by me and see if it's appropriate to post out to everybody.
Yeah. Sounds good.
All right, man. Thanks again.
Yep. Thank you.
All right, guys. That's it. Another couple stories in the books. Again, I want to thank Josh, of course, for coming on the podcast, especially on such short notice. I had a lot of fun talking to him, and it's a crazy world, but we probably live less than 40 minutes from each other when I'm in Colorado. So small world. But yeah, Josh, thank you again for coming on. Thank you for sharing your stories. Can't wait to have you back on, because I know you got plenty of more stories for us. That being said, guys, check him out. All of his links to his socials are right there in the show notes. And while you're there, check out our Instagram page. Make sure you give us a follow. And then whatever you're listening to this on right now, if you would, go and review the podcast. Give us more ratings. Means more people are likely to find us, because it puts us higher up in the search results. So that's it, guys. Thank you very much. Appreciate you all for tuning in. Now, get out there and make some stories of your own. Thank you.